Clara Hensley pushed open the wrought iron gate, its rusty hinges groaning under the weight of neglect. The Victorian house on Fog-bound Lane in Seacliff, Oregon, loomed ahead, its steep gabled roof cutting through the heavy coastal fog like a ship's prow. As a marine biologist, Clara thrived on order, measuring tide pools, charting coral growth, tracking the pulse of the ocean. But this house, with its warped floorboards and leaded glass windows, felt like a riddle wrapped in shadow. She'd bought it in October 2024, fleeing the noise of Portland and a breakup that left her raw. Seacliff's quiet beaches and sleepy streets promised a fresh start, a place to rebuild. Her first day was a blur of boxes and possibility. The house smelled of salt-soaked wood, with a faint undercurrent of something sharper, like damp earth laced with metal. Clara noticed it most in the upstairs study, a cramped room with a slanted ceiling and a single cloudy window. She shook off the unease, blaming the house's century-old bones. At 32, she trusted logic over instinct, her scientist mind dismissing ghosts in favor of creaky pipes. By evening, she was unpacking, stacking books on kelp ecosystems and crustacean behavior, her fingers lingering on their worn spines as if they could tether her to this new life. On day 2, Clara's need for precision took over. She grabbed her tape measure and a notepad, sketching the house's layout. The foyer spilled into a parlor with a chipped fireplace, then a kitchen with a dusty butler's pantry. A narrow staircase twisted up to 3 bedrooms and the study, its walls lined with empty bookshelves. But as she measured, something nagged at her. The hallway outside the study felt stunted, as if the end wall had swallowed a few feet of space. Curious, she tapped the paneling, expecting the solid thump of studs. Instead, the sound was hollow, a faint echo curling back like a held breath. Sloppy carpentry, she muttered, but the discrepancy clung to her thoughts like damp fog. That night, Clara sat cross-legged on the parlor floor, slurping takeout clam chowder and sifting through a drawer of papers left by the realtor. Among the utility manuals, she found a faded photograph, its edges curling like dried leaves. It showed a family, 2 adults and a young girl, posing stiffly in front of her house. The girl's eyes were unnervingly large, staring straight into the camera. On the back, scrawled in spidery ink, were the words, "Keep it sealed." Clara frowned, setting it aside. Just an odd keepsake, she told herself. Nothing more. She went to bed, the house creaking softly, the fog pressing against the windows like a living thing. At 3 a.m., she jolted awake. A sound, soft, deliberate, like something dragging across wood, drifted from the study above. Clara held her breath, ears straining. It stopped, leaving only the faint hum of the fridge downstairs. She tried to laugh it off, blaming the house's age, but sleep eluded her. By morning, her coffee was barely touched when she noticed something worse. The front door, which she'd locked before bed, stood slightly ajar, a sliver of gray dawn slicing through the gap. Her pulse quickened. She checked the deadbolt. No scratches, no signs of force. Had she forgotten to lock it? She didn't think so. Clara stepped into the hallway, her bare feet cold on the hardwood. The air felt thick, heavy with something unspoken. Then from the study above came a sound so faint it might have been her imagination. A whisper, like breath brushing glass curling through the wall. It spoke her name. Clara's hands trembled as she stood in the hallway, staring at the study door. The whisper from the night before. Her name, spoken in a voice too soft to place, had lodged in her chest like a shard of ice. She hadn't slept after hearing it, instead pacing the parlor until dawn, her flashlight gripped tight. By morning, the fog outside Seacliff's fog-bound lane was thicker, cloaking the Victorian house in a gray veil. Clara, a marine biologist who trusted data over dread, couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching her. The hollow wall, the ajar front door, that cryptic photograph, they weren't random. She needed answers. She called Eli, a local handyman she'd met at the hardware store while buying paint. He was gruff, mid-40s, with calloused hands and a habit of squinting like he was sizing up the world. "Sounds like you got a quirky old house," he said over the phone, his voice crackling with static. "Victorians are full of surprises. I'll swing by." When he arrived, his pickup rattling in the driveway, Clara led him to the study. She tapped the end wall again, the hollow echo sharper in the daylight. "This isn't right," she said, showing him her sketch of the house's layout. "There's space missing here, maybe 4 or 5 feet." Eli ran his knuckles along the paneling, his brow furrowing. "Could be a sealed-off closet. These old places got weird additions." He pulled a crowbar from his tool bag and pried at the seam where the bookshelf met the wall. The wood groaned, then gave way, revealing a hidden panel about 3 feet wide. Clara's stomach twisted as Eli swung it open. A narrow crawl space stretched into darkness, the air inside cool and sterile, like a room untouched by time. No dust, no cobwebs, just bare walls and a single rusted metal chair facing a small jagged hole in the drywall. Clara peered through it and froze. The hole looked directly into her bedroom, straight at her bed. "Jesus," Eli muttered, stepping back. "That's no closet." Clara's heart pounded. Someone could have sat there, watching her sleep, her every move exposed. She forced herself to step inside, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The space was tight, barely wide enough for 2 people to stand side by side. On the floor, near the chair, she spotted a small, locked tin box, its surface etched with the initials LM. The metal was cold to the touch, heavier than it looked. "You know anything about the people who lived here before?" she asked Eli, her voice tight. He scratched his neck, glancing at the peephole. "Heard the last owner was some historian. Real private guy. Moved out a couple years back, maybe 3. Folks said he was obsessed with this house, always poking around in it. Then he just up and vanished." Clara's mind raced. Vanished? She thought of the photograph, the note about keeping something sealed. Before she could press Eli further, a neighbor's voice cut through the fog outside. Mrs. Harrow, an older woman with sharp eyes and a perpetual frown, stood on the sidewalk, watching them through the study window. "Don't go stirring what's settled," she called, her tone more warning than greeting. Clara forced a smile, but Mrs. Harrow turned away, her shawl flapping as she retreated across the street. Back in the crawl space, Clara set the tin box on the study desk, her fingers lingering on the lock. She wanted to open it, but something about its weight, its deliberate placement, made her hesitate. Eli suggested boarding up the panel for now, but as they stepped out of the crawl space, a sound stopped them cold. A low, scraping drag, like wood on wood, coming from deeper in the house. Not the study, not the hallway, but somewhere below, maybe the basement. Clara's pulse quickened. She looked at Eli, whose face had gone pale. "You heard that right?" she whispered. He nodded, gripping his crowbar. They returned to the study to grab the tin box, planning to take it to the police. But when Clara reached for it, her hand froze. The desk was empty. The box left there just minutes ago was gone. Clara's hands shook as she scrolled through the security footage, the grainy images flickering on her laptop screen in the dim light of the Victorian house's parlor. It was past midnight in Seacliff, Oregon, and the fog outside pressed against the windows like a shroud. The crawl space behind the study wall, with its rusted chair and peephole into her bedroom, had shattered any sense of safety she'd felt in her new home. The missing tin box, etched with the initials LM, had reappeared briefly before vanishing again, as if the house itself was playing a cruel game. Now Clara was hunting for proof, something to convince herself she wasn't losing her mind. She'd installed a security camera in the hallway after the crawl space discovery, its lens trained on the study door. The footage from the past 3 nights showed nothing at first, just the empty hallway bathed in the camera's infrared glow. But at 4:02 a.m. last night, there it was, a shadow, fleeting and formless, sliding across the wall like ink spilling over paper. It lingered near the study door, then vanished. Clara replayed it a dozen times, her pulse quickening. Was it a person? A trick of light? The camera's angle didn't catch the door itself opening, but the shadow's movement felt deliberate, like it knew it was being watched. The scraping sounds had shifted too. No longer confined to the basement or study, they now came from the attic, rhythmic, almost like a signal, echoing through the house between 2 and 4 a.m. Clara had tried to dismiss them as squirrels or wind, but the rhythm was too precise, too human. She'd set traps in the attic, hoping to catch a raccoon, but found nothing. No droppings, no claw marks, just the faint smell of stale air and something metallic. Her rational mind, honed by years of marine biology, was fraying. Houses didn't whisper names, shadows didn't move with purpose. Yet here she was, afraid to close her eyes. Desperate for answers, Clara spent her days off at the Seacliff Library, a squat building that smelled of mildew and old paper. She pored over town records, her fingers smudged with dust from century-old ledgers. The house's history unraveled in fragments. A fire, in 1927, had killed a family. Edith and Thomas Morrow, their son and their daughter. Lila, aged 9, but Lila's body was never found. The records listed her as missing, presumed dead, a footnote in the town's tragedy. Clara's breath caught when she saw the initials. L.M. Lila Morrow. The tin box, the child's voice in her dreams, it couldn't be coincidence. Digging deeper, she found mentions of Victor Klein, the historian who'd owned the house before her. Newspaper clippings from 2020 described him as eccentric, a man obsessed with Seacliff's past. He'd written articles claiming the house on Fogbound Lane was a vessel for what lingers, hinting at rituals to contact the dead. One article mentioned a police report. Klein had been caught digging into the house's walls, claiming he'd heard voices. Then, in 2021, he vanished, leaving behind a half-finished manuscript about the Morrow fire. Clara's skin prickled. Was Klein chasing Lila's ghost? Or something worse? She confronted Mrs. Harrow, the neighbor whose sharp eyes seemed to track Clara's every move. Standing on Mrs. Harrow's porch, Clara held up a photocopy of the Morrow family photo she'd found on her first day. "You know something about this house," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Mrs. Harrow's lips thinned, her gaze flicking to the photo. "Some places hold on to their pain," she said finally. Klein thought he could listen to it. "But you don't open doors like that without consequences. Leave it be, girl." She shut the door before Clara could respond. Back home, Clara's dreams grew vivid, almost tactile. The child's voice, Lila's, called her name, soft but insistent, from behind the walls. She woke one morning to find scratches on the study floor, shallow but precise, as if something heavy had been dragged in a circle. Her stomach churned. She checked the security footage again, her fingers trembling as she fast-forwarded to 4 a.m. The study door, locked when she went to bed, creaked open on its own. A shadow lingered in the frame, too tall to be a child, before the camera cut to static. Clara's breath hitched. Whatever was in the house wasn't just watching. It was moving closer. That night, as the fog thickened outside, Clara sat in her bedroom, staring at the ceiling vent above her bed. The same vent she'd seen from the crawl space, its slats offering a clear view of her sleeping form. The air grew heavy, the metallic smell sharper. Then, clear as a bell, her name echoed through the vent, spoken in a voice that wasn't hers, a voice that sounded like it had been waiting. Clara hadn't slept in days, her eyes burning from staring into the dark corners of the Victorian house on Fog-bound Lane. The whispers, the missing tin box, the shadows on her security camera. They'd stripped away the sanctuary she'd hoped to find in Seacliff, Oregon. Now at 2 a.m., she sat in the study, a flashlight in one hand, a crowbar in the other, her back pressed against the wall where the hidden crawl space lay boarded up. The air was heavy with the same damp earth and metal smell she'd noticed on her first day, only now it felt like a warning. The house wasn't just old, it was alive with secrets, and Clara was done running from them. The past week had been a descent into paranoia. After the tin box vanished, Clara had installed a second security camera, this one angled at the study door. The footage showed nothing concrete, just fleeting shadows at 4 a.m., a flicker of movement that could have been a trick of light. But the scraping sounds, those deliberate drags across wood, had grown louder, more rhythmic, like a code she couldn't crack. They came from the attic now, not the basement, as if whatever was in the house was circling her, testing her nerve. Her dreams were no better. A child's voice, thin and urgent, calling her name through the walls, pleading for her to find it. She dug deeper into the house's history, spending hours at the Seacliff Library. Old records told of a fire in 1927 that gutted the house, killing a family, parents and 2 children, except for one, a girl named Lila Morrow, who vanished. The initials LM on the tin box burned in Clara's mind. Was Lila the child in her dreams? The historian who'd owned the house before, a man named Victor Klein, had been obsessed with the fire, according to yellowed newspaper clippings. He'd written letters to the town council, claiming the house held echoes of the past, begging to excavate its walls. Then he disappeared in 2021, leaving no trace. Mrs. Harrow, the neighbor who watched Clara's house like a hawk, had finally spoken after days of cryptic warnings. "Some houses don't let go," she'd said, her voice low as she stood on her porch. Klein thought he could talk to what's left. He was wrong. When Clara pressed for more, Mrs. Harrow shut her door. Clara's calls to the police were met with polite skepticism. Officers searched the attic and found nothing but dust and a loose window screen. "Probably a transient," they said, but their eyes lingered on the crawl space's boarded panel, as if they felt the house's weight too. Now, in the study, Clara's flashlight beam swept the room, catching the edges of the bookshelves she'd never filled. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint creak of the house settling. Or so she told herself. She'd decided to stay up all night, determined to catch whatever was tormenting her. The crowbar was cold in her grip, her knuckles white. At 3:15 a.m., the scraping started again, slow and deliberate, directly above her in the attic. Her heart thudded, but she forced herself to stand, pulling the attic ladder down with a shaky hand. The smell hit her first, stale, like unwashed clothes mixed with something sour. She climbed, flashlight trembling, and swept the beam across the rafters. There in the far corner stood a figure. Gaunt, pale, its silhouette barely human, it hunched under the low roof facing her. Clara's breath caught. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stared with eyes that glinted in the light like polished glass. For a moment she thought it was a trick of shadow, but then it shifted, its head tilting as if curious. Instinct screamed at her to run, but she froze. The flashlight beam locked on the figure. It took a step forward, then vanished into the dark, as if swallowed by the attic itself. Clara stumbled back, nearly falling down the ladder, her pulse roaring in her ears. She called Eli at dawn, her voice hoarse. He arrived with nails and plywood, his face grim as they boarded up the attic hatch. "You need to leave, Clara," he said, hammering with more force than necessary. But she couldn't. Not yet. The house had hooked her. Its mystery a tide pulling her under. That afternoon she found the tin box again, tucked in the attic corner where the figure had stood. It was unlocked now, its lid ajar. Inside were drawings, child sketches of a house with jagged lines for walls, rooms that didn't exist, and a stick figure labeled the Keeper, standing over a bed. Clara's bed. The police came again, took the box, the drawings, and her statement. No evidence of anyone living here, they said, but their flashlights lingered on the attic's shadows. Clara didn't sleep that night, or the next. She sat in the study, the crowbar across her lap, her eyes on the boarded crawl space. She wasn't leaving, not because she felt safe, but because she needed to know. Who was Lila Morrow? What did Victor Klein find in these walls? And why did the house whisper her name? As she drifted into uneasy sleep, the air grew heavy, the smell of earth and metal thick around her. Behind her, the crawl space panel, nailed shut hours ago, creaked open, revealing a sliver of darkness that seemed to breathe.